I never pictured myself stepping into the family business when I was younger, but my dad's strong influence in landscaping had a way of guiding my choices. I started out with basic chores like sweeping and organizing files, and little by little, I took on more until I genuinely grew to respect the work. My dad was all about hard work. He'd often push me into field work where I learned hands-on skills and saw the importance of grit and honesty. By the time high school wrapped up, I was already leading crews each summer, feeling a sense of belonging to the business. When the time came for me to take the reins, I knew it would be a challenge, but my dad's values and my own drive gave me confidence. Running the business has brought its own set of hurdles, especially with everything going digital. Sure, technology makes things easier with tasks like payroll and invoicing, but when things go wrong, it can be a nightmare. After 7 years running the show, I've had my fair share of tech glitches, but I've learned to keep them in check by using backups, both local and cloud, to keep things moving smoothly. I also have contingency plans to keep the essential systems running even if something goes down. Enough tech talk. Let me tell you about myself. I'm Donald Langston, but most folks just call me Don, while my wife and my mom stick with Donnie. I'm 35, standing at 6 feet 5 inches and weighing in around 225 pounds, with a deep tan from years of working outdoors. My wife, Samantha, is also 35, a personal trainer with blonde hair, blue eyes, and a small but athletic frame. We've been married for 13 years and have 2 kids, Natalie, who's 9, and Ethan, who's 7. Langston's Landscaping was originally my dad's creation, and I always had a sense that I'd end up taking over. Being their only child, I was always around, helping my parents out from a young age. As I grew older, my dad was adamant that I work directly in the field to learn the ropes from scratch, and, surprisingly, I enjoyed it. By high school, I was managing crews, and 7 years ago, I expanded the business to include 12 crews offering everything from lawn care to snow removal in winter. While I spend most of my time in the office now, I still like to be out on site from time to time. March and April are hectic in the office with taxes, employee records, and contract renewals to get through. This year, my mom offered to help, but she's not exactly a tech expert and ended up deleting a few crucial files by accident. Fortunately, I had backups, though restoring everything took a while. During the wait, I turned to Google Earth, a tool I often use for project planning since it lets me survey a site from above before diving into the job. As I waited for the backups to load, I decided to check out my own house on Google Earth, thinking about adding a pool now that the kids are older. But as I zoomed in, something strange caught my eye, a car parked in my driveway that I didn't recognize. While I know most of Britt's friends and what they drive, this car was unfamiliar. Judging by the snow and the completed garage addition, the image had to be from just a few months back. Maybe last winter. The car was a red sedan, but I couldn't make out the model or the details. With some time to kill, I switched to Street View, hoping it might give me a different angle. The photo there was from later in the year, with dogwoods blooming. The car was gone, but another sight hit me like a brick. Samantha, my wife, standing in our doorway, hugging and kissing a man I didn't recognize. My blood boiled, but I kept my cool and printed a few copies of the image to get a closer look. The guy's face wasn't fully visible, but something about him looked familiar. After staring at the photo for a while, it dawned on me. He looked an awful lot like Britt's college ex, Ben Nolan. That realization shook me, but I wasn't about to act on a hunch. I had to be sure. I started considering my options. Cameras, recorders, or maybe even hiring a private investigator. Still, I knew I couldn't jump to conclusions without all the facts. Staring at that photo, anger simmered beneath the surface, but I held myself back and started plotting my next step. Eventually, I decided to dig into Ben's current life, just to see if anything came up. A quick online search showed that, after a short NFL career cut off by a knee injury, Ben had switched over to real estate and seemed to be thriving. He'd moved back to town a couple of years ago, where he'd set up his own office and built a solid business. He was married with 1 child. His wife, Hannah, had curly brown hair and striking green eyes. She was attractive enough, but honestly, I didn't think she held a candle to Samantha. Still, I couldn't shake the anger and the sense of betrayal that image stirred up. Hannah worked alongside Ben as the accountant at his real estate office, a setup that probably gave him a lot of leeway and more than enough opportunity to slip around if he was inclined. An idea struck me, and I checked my watch. 10:33 a.m. I looked up Ben Nolan's office number and gave it a call. A cheerful voice answered. letting me know that Ben was out showing a property and wouldn't be back for at least an hour. I didn't bother leaving a message. Even without solid proof of an affair, the image of Samantha with Ben was enough to light a fire under me. That man looked exactly like her old flame, and her behavior was undeniably out of line. Frustrated, I grabbed the printed photo and headed out to my truck. As I climbed in, I caught sight of one of my son's toy cars lying in the back. It stopped me cold. I knew I needed to think carefully about how my next moves would impact my kids. After taking a breath and collecting myself, I turned the key and made my way to Ben's office, which was in one of the newer buildings downtown. I spotted one of my crew foremen nearby, but kept my focus. I had one goal in mind. Walking through that office building in my dusty work clothes, I could feel the eyes of the office types following me. Finally, I reached the 5th floor and stepped into Nolan Real Estate, spotting Hannah Nolan right away. She was a bit taller and slimmer than her pictures let on, with a professional air and a welcoming demeanor. I introduced myself. "Hello, I'm Donald Langston," I said. She smiled politely. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Langston. How can I assist you?" "Mrs. Nolan, I've got a photo here I'd like you to look at, and I need to ask you a few questions." Her smile dropped, and she looked at me more closely, realizing this wasn't about real estate. She told a colleague to cover the front desk, then led me back to the break room. Inside, she sat across from me, waiting. I took a seat and handed her the printout. "The woman is my wife, Samantha," I explained. "She and your husband dated back in college. Can you tell if that's Ben?" Hannah's expression shifted as she studied the photo, first showing surprise, then sadness, and finally anger. After a moment, she passed it back. "That's him. When did this happen?" "Just a few months ago, maybe 3, I replied, explaining how I'd found it on Google Earth. I pointed out Britt's earrings, which I'd given her for Christmas, confirming the timeline. Hannah softened for a moment, but her face soon hardened. "I'm certain that's Ben. Have you spoken to your wife yet?" she asked. "Not yet. She should be at work right now," I answered. Hannah's brow furrowed, suggesting I double-check. I called Samantha, but she didn't pick up. I tried her gym next, where a friend Katie reluctantly told me that Britt had left about 10 minutes ago, supposedly to meet me for lunch at Logan's. Checking to find my phone app, I saw she was at our house. I told Hannah, and her expression darkened. Without hesitation, she headed out, and I followed her to the exit. She called to her assistant, "Alex, I'm out for lunch. If Ben shows up, call me immediately." Her anger was tangible as we entered the elevator. She looked me dead in the eye. "He better have a good reason for what's in that photo. I've given him one pass already." Surprised, I asked, "He's cheated before?" Then quickly apologized for asking. She nodded, confirming that it had happened back when they lived in Colorado. They'd moved here for a fresh start, but her tone made it clear she wasn't up for more second chances. On the drive, silence filled the car until Hannah finally broke it. "I can't believe your wife would bring Ben into your own house." "It's calculated," I replied. "She knows my routine, that I'm usually stuck in the office this time of year, and she'd have plenty of time to cover her tracks." I could hear the bitterness in my own voice, and I gave Hannah a small, apologetic look to show I didn't blame her. Maybe I'm just too predictable, too trusting. She could have been doing this for years without me noticing. Hannah was quiet for a few moments, and as I picked up speed, she looked over with an understanding that hit me harder than I expected. "There are usually signs when a spouse is cheating," Hannah said softly. "Yeah, I know," I replied, feeling a sting, "but I haven't seen anything. Our bed life is the same. She acts normal around me and the kids, and she rarely goes out with friends." "There weren't any signs with Ben, either," Hannah admitted, her voice catching before she fell silent again. As I turned onto my street, my stomach dropped when I spotted a red car parked in my driveway. Hannah's voice startled me. "That's Ben's car," she said, her tone a mix of anger and sadness. The reality hit us both. If we found what we feared, our marriages might be over. I parked on the street and led the way to the backyard, Hannah following closely, now with a digital camera in hand. I cursed myself for not bringing mine from the office. Quietly, we slipped in through the back door, and the unmistakable sounds of my wife's moans echoed through the house. My heart shattered, the anger bubbling up beneath it. I gestured for Hannah to stay close as we crept through the kitchen, expecting to find them in the living room. When I finally looked, there was Samantha on the couch, not with Ben, but with another woman. Thrown off, I scanned the room and saw Ben, holding a tablet, recording the entire scene. Hannah already had her camera running. My anger surged, and before I knew it, I felt Hannah's hand on my arm, trying to hold me back. But when Ben joined in, I snapped, shaking her off and stepping into the room. The other woman turned at the sound of my footsteps, her face filled with shock. I grabbed Ben and shoved him to the floor. "Shut up, all of you," I shouted, taking a swing at Ben. "Don't move, or I swear I'll tear you apart." As I turned to the other woman, I recognized her. Sean Murphy, our 19-year-old neighbor who sometimes babysat for us. "Sean?" I asked, incredulous. She looked down ashamed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "How long has this been going on?" I growled. "This is only the second time, I swear," she stammered, eyes wide. "Don't lie to me." I spat. Cheating was cheating, whether with a man or a woman. To me, Samantha had crossed the line, plain and simple. I picked up Ben's tablet, which had fallen in the scuffle, and made sure Sean could see it. "I've got a video of you doing some pretty filthy things. Get out of my house, and don't ever come back. If you even think about contacting my wife again, I'll make sure this footage is everywhere, online, to your family, and anyone who'll listen. Understand?" Sean's face turned pale as she nodded, trembling. "Yes," she managed. "Good. Now get out." I barked. "You pathetic little strumpet." I then pulled out my phone and dialed my father-in-law, David, setting it to speaker. Samantha's eyes widened, pleading silently for mercy, but I wasn't about to give her an easy out. "Hey, David," I said as he picked up. "Don here. Can you and Elaine come by the house? It's important." He sounded concerned. "Is everything all right? Are the kids okay?" "The kids are fine. This is about Samantha and me. I'd rather show you than explain over the phone." After a long pause, David responded, his voice somber. "We'll be there in about 15 minutes. Don't do anything rash before we get there." "I won't," I assured him, ending the call. I called my own parents with a similar request and then put the phone away. Samantha, sobbing uncontrollably on the couch, knew exactly what was coming. Hannah, on the other hand, stayed calm. "He needs a hospital, Dawn," she said, her voice firm. "I understand you're angry, but I can't ignore that." "Fine," I replied. "How about you call for an ambulance?" Hannah gave me a long look, sensing my intent to delay her, then let out a sigh. "All right, but after this is all over, I'm taking him to the ER." "Agreed," I said. "Hold on to the tablet and your camera for now. I'll need them for the divorce." I paused. "Thank you, Hannah." She nodded, then called her office, mentioning she'd be out for the day due to an emergency. "Mr. Nolan's going to the hospital after this," she informed them. My parents arrived first, living closer than my in-laws. They walked in, took one look around, and their expressions shifted from shock to grim understanding. My mom's face turned red as she surveyed the scene, while Dad placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "Donnie, what's going on?" Mom asked, eyes darting to Samantha. "Mom, Dad," I said, "it's all here plain as day. I can explain everything, and if you want, I can show you the videos. They're recorded from 2 angles. Mom shook her head, face flushed. She almost handed Samantha a blanket from the sofa, but I stopped her. "No, Mom. David and Elaine need to see Samantha just as she is. They need to know that I'm not to blame for this marriage ending." Samantha looked up, eyes full of desperation. "Donnie, please don't," she begged. "Shut up. Did you think I'd catch you like this and just pretend it never happened? You're delusional." My in-laws, David and Elaine, arrived minutes later. Elaine froze, her mouth open in shock as her gaze landed on Samantha. "Who is this?" I demanded, turning to Samantha. "Are you going to explain yourself? Or should I?" She stayed silent, eyes downcast, so I laid it all out, from the car I found on Google Earth to meeting Hannah, and finally, the sight that greeted us here at home. Both sets of parents listened in stunned silence until Elaine, clearly shaken, spoke up. "This must be a misunderstanding. Samantha wouldn't, she just wouldn't," she whispered, almost pleading. "I've got video evidence," I said calmly, holding up the SD card. "Would you like to see it?" "Don't," my mom said softly, her voice filled with worry. "It won't help anything, Dawn. It'll only bring more pain." "No one's going to question what happened here," I replied firmly. "I want this settled once and for all." David put a hand up to settle things. "The real question here, Dawn, is what you're planning to do now." I met his gaze, my decision unshaken. "I'm sorry, David, but divorce is the only option." I can't stay married to someone like her. As Hannah helped Ben gather his belongings, I pressed on. I want custody of the kids. Samantha can have visitation, but they'll live with me. That's not up for negotiation. Elaine tried to protest, but I stopped her, my tone leaving no room for argument. This isn't a discussion. If I don't get what I want, Samantha's actions will be public, online for everyone to see. Are we clear? I turned back to Samantha. Do you understand? Finally, she cracked. Do you understand? She shouted back, her voice breaking. Don't call me a strumpet. Oh, you're a strumpet, I snapped. And I'm not going to let you raise our daughter to be anything like you. The argument escalated fast, turning into a full-on screaming match. We went back and forth until I suddenly remembered the time. School would be letting out soon. The kids are about to be home, I said coolly. Go clean yourself up and get dressed before they walk through that door. Then we'll explain why Mommy won't be living here anymore. She shot back. I'll tell them why Daddy won't be here. Fine, I replied, but don't waste any time. I walked to the den, carrying Hannah's camera with me, making it clear I wasn't bluffing about the footage. Samantha realized I was serious and came rushing after me, desperate. Wait, she called. You know the courts won't give you custody. Nowadays, Samantha, I could probably commit a crime and still get custody. I retorted. Not if you tell the judge you don't want it, she replied, her eyes full of desperation. I let my anger show, wanting her to fully understand the damage she'd done. When she didn't back down, I shrugged and started to walk away. Dawn, you can't do this, she cried. Watch me, I answered coldly. You won't, she insisted. You still love me. Maybe I did once, I said, my voice harsh. But now I know more about you than I ever wanted to. She broke into tears again, but I was numb, just wanting this nightmare to end. Do you hate me enough to go through with all this? She asked, her voice shaking. Yes, I replied without hesitation. And if you don't give me what I want in the divorce, I'll spend every last bit of energy making sure you suffer, even if it destroys me too. A terrible thought crossed my mind. Are Natalie and Ethan even mine, Samantha? Her face registered pure shock. How could you even ask that? How could you do this? I shot back. At this point, I don't know what to believe. I never thought you'd betray me like this. I tucked the SD card back in my pocket, holding on to Ben's tablet as I walked back to the living room, Samantha trailing behind me. Just as we entered, I overheard my parents and her parents talking. Do you think he'll really go through with it, Stan? Elaine whispered, voice laced with anxiety. It could ruin Samantha's future. My dad's response was calm and resolute. After what she did to him, I don't care what happens to her. She deserves every bit of it. The room fell silent as I walked in, and all eyes turned toward me. Elaine looked uneasy, but I was far from sympathetic. Dawn, demanding full custody isn't fair, Elaine started. The kids need their mother. Mrs. Fletcher, I replied, my tone icy. Your opinion means nothing to me. If you try to fight me on this, you know exactly what will happen. It's astonishing none of you seem to care that Samantha was the one who crossed the line. But that's fine. Leave if you can't face it. Take your daughter with you if you want. Their expressions were a mix of shock and anger, muttering under their breath that I was being unreasonable and speculating that Samantha might take me for everything in the divorce. But things didn't play out as anyone expected. Samantha might have had her confidence in the court system, but she was only partly right. She called my bluff on the video, and I didn't hesitate to prove I wasn't bluffing. When the judge awarded her custody, she smirked at me, and I simply stared back. Later, I took Ben's tablet to a coffee shop, uploaded the edited footage to every website I could find, and sent the links to her family using Ben's email account. I even posted it on his social media before tossing the tablet into the river. True to my word, Samantha's reputation took a hit after I shared the video. She lost her job at the gym, though thankfully, the divorce had already been finalized, so I didn't owe her a cent in spousal support. She even tried to get a share of the family business, but since it technically still belongs to my dad, she came up empty-handed. I managed the family business, and my salary technically came from my dad, which meant our finances stayed separate. The judge set my child support payments at $600 a month, but my lawyer managed to delay them until paternity tests came through. Admittedly, I pushed for the test partly to get under Britt's skin, but the relief was real when they confirmed Natalie and Ethan were mine. Britt got half of our savings and checking accounts, but she couldn't keep up with the mortgage, so she ended up selling the house. We split the sale proceeds, which allowed her to buy a modest home nearby. I also bought a smaller house within the same school district, though paying child support meant I had to cut back on other spending. My dad offered to boost my salary, but I turned him down, knowing it would just increase my support obligations. Natalie and Ethan liked the new place, though they hated that their mom and I weren't together. I kept them busy with trips to the park, hiking, and the occasional visit to the aquatic center. As for my personal life, I started dating again not long after the divorce was finalized. I hadn't done anything wrong, so there was no reason to stay alone. While I had no trouble finding dates, I was looking for someone I could build something real with. Occasionally, the kids mentioned their mom, hoping we'd get back together, but I reminded them we were done. I didn't have feelings for her anymore. About 6 months later, I bumped into Katie Lewis, one of the trainers from Britt's gym. We met in the grocery store, and I immediately noticed her interests seemed mutual. When she asked if I was seeing anyone, I told her I wasn't. She smiled, leaned in, touched my arm, and playfully asked, "Do you like what you see?" "Yes, I do," I replied, deciding to take a chance. I invited her over for dinner, pulling her close as I added, "And maybe we can talk about dessert too." Dating Katie was a revelation. She was smart, funny, great with the kids, and incredibly supportive. After our third date, we decided to be exclusive, and I didn't look back. She filled a void I hadn't even realized was there. And for the first time since the divorce, I felt genuinely happy. A few months into my relationship with Katie, I got a call from my former father-in-law, David. He informed me Samantha was in the hospital, and they needed me to pick up the kids. I could tell he expected me to ask why, but I didn't bite. I only asked if it was anything that might hurt the kids. He paused, then mentioned she was at the Zalupa Center, a mental health facility. I didn't say much, just shrugged it off and ended the call. On the drive over, Samantha's actions flashed through my mind. I'd replayed everything 1,000 times, but I never directly asked her why she'd done it, knowing I wouldn't trust her answer anyway. In the end, it didn't matter. Infidelity was a line I wouldn't cross, and staying would have destroyed my self-respect. When I arrived at the Fletcher's house, Natalie and Ethan looked shaken, clinging to each other in a way that wasn't typical. David's face was a mask of bitterness as he sent the kids inside to gather their things. The second we were alone, he rounded on me. "What's wrong with you, Dawn?" he demanded angrily. I replied with a calm sarcasm. "Other than a touch of nearsightedness? Nothing." "Don't be a smartass," he snapped. "Your ex-wife is in a mental hospital, and you don't care?" "First off, David, she's not my wife anymore," I shot back. "She's the one who tore our marriage apart, not me. And no, I don't care. Why should I? She cheated on me. I didn't betray her. It's your fault she's there," David countered, his voice rising. "You posted that video and ruined her reputation. She can barely find work now. I warned everyone what would happen if I didn't get what I wanted. She chose to fight me, and now she's living with the consequences," I replied coldly. "If she's that desperate, maybe she should take it up with her new pimp." "You son of a," he shouted, grabbing the front of my shirt. Calmly, I pried his hand off me, making it clear I wasn't going to be intimidated. "Think twice before you try that again, David," I said. "I know you love Samantha, but you have to see that everything that's happened is on her. If you were in my shoes, wouldn't you have done the same?" He took a breath, slowly releasing his anger. Defeated, he muttered, "Maybe I would. It's just easier to be mad at you than to accept what my daughter's done." "Go ahead, then," I replied, still irritated. "Tell me what's going on." After a moment's hesitation, David finally admitted, "Samantha tried to take her own life." "Do the kids know?" I asked, the weight of the situation hitting me. He nodded, pained. "Yes. Natalie found her after she'd taken a bottle of sleeping pills. She's the one who called 911. I couldn't help but feel terrible for Natalie, imagining the trauma she went through, but I was also incredibly proud of her for staying calm and doing the right thing. I made a mental note to tell her how proud I was. "How are they coping?" I asked David. "Natalie and Ethan are both shaken up, but Ethan's having the hardest time." "Natalie's been glued to his side," David said, his voice strained. I thanked him for letting me know and promised to keep an extra close watch on the kids. Over the next few days, that's exactly what I did. I sat down with Natalie and Ethan to talk about what happened, making sure to praise Natalie's quick thinking, which brought a proud smile to her face. After weeks of treatment, Samantha was finally discharged. They say she's stable now. I told Katie, but I don't know. I can't see how therapy and meds alone could fix the deeper issues that led her to do what she did. Soon after, Samantha wanted to return to joint custody. I asked the kids how they felt about it. Natalie seemed unsure, but Ethan was thrilled at the idea of spending time with his mom again. Unless you're up for another legal battle, you might need to agree to it, Katie pointed out logically. You could argue she's unfit after what happened, but I'm not sure it would be worth it. I won't stop her from seeing the kids, I said, feeling a sense of resignation. Katie's face softened. I didn't think you would. I just don't want the kids to have to deal with more drama. She paused, adding, I don't know what turned her into this selfish, careless witch, but it happened. Katie reached over and took my hand, smiling. Why don't we talk about something more positive, she suggested. I couldn't help but return her smile. What do you have in mind? At that moment, I knew it was time. Over the past few months, Katie had become someone truly special to me. I thought we could talk about our future, I said, pulling out a small ring box. Katie, I love you, and so do the kids. I hate being apart from you. Will you marry me? I opened the box, revealing the ring Natalie and Ethan had helped me pick out. Her expression softened, and she gently closed the box, a look of sadness in her eyes. Dawn, this is beautiful, she said quietly, and it means so much to me. But marriage? That's just not what I'm looking for. You're a great man and an amazing dad, but marriage isn't something I want, especially with the complications of an ex and kids. Our time together has been wonderful, but to me, it was just that time together, not a step towards something more permanent. My heart sank as her words registered. I get it, I said, barely concealing my disappointment. Thanks for being honest. She gave me a sad smile as she gathered her things. I walked her to the door, leaning in for a last kiss, but she turned her cheek. Realizing this was truly goodbye, I closed the door behind her. The following weeks were rough. I'd been through breakups before, but this one hurt in a way I hadn't expected. Katie had been the first person I'd truly connected with since the divorce, so this hit hard. The kids noticed her absence, too. Why did she leave, Dad? Ethan asked one evening. It wasn't about you, I reassured him. She just needed to move on. Natalie, who's always been perceptive, seemed to understand but didn't push for details. Time moved on, and I returned to dating, though this time I made sure everyone knew up front that I wasn't looking to dive into anything serious. I didn't hide my past either, and I found most women hesitated after hearing about my ex-wife situation. I couldn't really blame them. The loneliness was hard. I kept in touch with Hannah, who eventually divorced Ben, but chose not to take him for much in the settlement. I didn't want that big house, she admitted one day. Too many memories. I just wanted a home, not a status symbol. What did you end up doing? I asked, curious about how she'd handle things. We sold the house and split the proceeds, each buying our own place. I kept my share in Ben's real estate business, but chose not to ask for heavy alimony. I wanted to move forward on my terms, she added, pride in her voice. I respect that, I nodded. Hannah never judged me for posting Samantha's video. In fact, she'd always been supportive. I understand why you did it, she said once. But just keep in mind, that video alone won't get you full custody unless Samantha's on board with it. I know, I replied, feeling a mix of frustration and acceptance. But I had to make a stand. Hannah gave me a look that was both understanding and cautious. You're still holding on to some of that anger, aren't you? Yeah, I admitted, though maybe not as much as before. She nodded, letting it go and steering our conversation toward lighter topics, just what I needed. How are the kids? Hannah asked. They're doing all right, I replied. Ethan's still hoping his mom and I will somehow get back together, and Natalie's a little too smart for her own good. Kids grow up so fast, Hannah said with a hint of nostalgia. Yeah, they really do, I agreed. Her son, Connor, often spent time with us since he and Ethan were in the same grade. One afternoon, as Hannah came by to pick him up, she spotted the ring box. Don, what's this? She asked, holding it up. I sighed. That's all that's left from my engagement to Katie. After I shared the story, she shook her head with a look of sadness. I'm sorry, Don. Thanks, I said. I guess I'm just bad at picking the right people. She laughed lightly. Join the club. I'm not any better. We both laughed, but we both knew Hannah had someone special in her life. It was starting to seem like wedding bells weren't too far off for her. Do you think the issue was me? I asked after a pause. Hannah gave me a thoughtful look. Maybe you're carrying around some unresolved stuff. You never found out why your ex cheated, right? That could still be weighing on you. I never tried to find out. I admitted. But do you think talking to Samantha would really make a difference? Maybe, she replied with a shrug. What's the harm? Good point. I agreed. I guess it's worth a try. That Sunday, as I took the kids to Samantha's place, I made up my mind to finally have that conversation. The kids looked a little confused when I walked them up to the door. Dad, what are you doing? Ethan asked. I need to talk to your mom, I said. Nothing for you to worry about. They nodded, and I knocked on the door. Samantha opened it, clearly surprised to see me. What do you want? She asked, her tone barely polite. I need to talk to you in private, I replied. She sent the kids inside and folded her arms, her expression guarded. What does the great Dawn want? I want to know why you cheated on me, I said straightforward. What? She looked genuinely taken aback. I want to understand why, I repeated. It's been over a year, so why ask now, she snapped. Because I was too furious to care back then, I replied. But now I need to know why you destroyed our marriage. So now it's all my fault? She shot back bitterly. You're the one who cheated, not me, I said, keeping my voice calm. If you don't want to explain, just say so, and I'll leave. She hesitated, her expression softening for a moment before she looked me in the eye. I felt this pull to be with another woman, she admitted quietly. Why didn't you explore that before we started dating? I asked. I tried, but I always backed out. Worried my parents would find out, she replied. After a pause, she continued. One night, Sean caught me alone in the women's locker room. After that, I couldn't let her go. So that's when you decided you were gay? I asked, still shocked. Samantha shook her head. No, I'm bisexual. But I knew how much monogamy meant to you. And even if I gave up Sean, just that first night with her would have ended things between us. You're right, I said. I made my boundaries clear from the start. Yes, you did, she said, with a flicker of emotion. But it wasn't as easy as you think to give up everything for a single mistake. Oh, come on, Samantha, I replied, feeling anger creep up. It couldn't have been that hard. What about Ben? I asked. He wasn't a woman. No, he wasn't, she admitted. He started out as a client, but then he kept pushing for more, and I resisted for a while, but eventually I gave in. By then, I knew if you found out, it'd be over, so I tried to keep it hidden. So it wasn't just one mistake, I said, doing my best to stay composed. No, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. It went on for weeks, and I'm the one who ruined it. I asked, barely believing her nerve. Are you seriously blaming me? For once, I'm not blaming you, she said, almost softly. But yes, you're the one who put an end to it. Maybe I shouldn't have asked, I said quietly. And I thought knowing would help, but now I just feel worse. You didn't even respect me enough to be honest. You just went for whatever you wanted. Samantha shrugged. I didn't think about you until it was too late. Did you ever love me? I asked. Yes, I did, she said, her voice softening slightly. I'm sorry for hurting you and the kids, but that doesn't change what happened. Were you ever faithful? I asked. Yes, she replied. I was faithful until that night with Sean. After that, I was a mess, and my therapist finally helped me see how wrong I'd been. She paused, her tone suddenly growing bitter again. But you didn't have to ruin everything, Dawn. You wrecked my relationship with my parents, ruined my reputation, and now I can't even find a job in my field. Moving somewhere new wouldn't make a difference. And you destroyed Sean's life too. She wouldn't even talk to me because of that video. How could you do that? I took a deep breath, keeping my tone steady. I warned you, Samantha. I told you that if I didn't get a fair outcome in the divorce, I'd make sure to ruin everything for you. You just chose to ignore that, thinking I'd never go through with it. But I'm not a liar, Samantha. Tears rolled down her cheeks. No, Dawn, you did it to get back at me. Your pride couldn't handle being hurt. No, Samantha, I replied, keeping my voice steady. If you'd been honest from the start and told me everything, I might have hated you, but I'd have still respected you. Instead, you went behind my back. You're not even as honest as someone who sells themselves on the street. They at least admit what they are. The words seemed to hit her hard. She didn't argue, just looked at me, a mixture of regret and sadness in her eyes. Dawn, I know I have no right to be angry with you, she said quietly. My therapist says I'm actually mad at myself, but I end up blaming you. I told the kids the divorce was my fault, not yours. Thanks for that, Samantha, I replied, feeling a slight easing of the tension between us. That'll make things a bit easier on them. I turned to leave, thinking our conversation was done, but she stopped me. Wait, she said. I have a few questions too. I turned back surprised. What do you want to ask? Why did you give up on me so fast? She asked, looking genuinely confused. Why didn't you even try to fight for us? I couldn't help but scoff. Seriously? Don't you remember our talks when we were dating? We talked about how cheating shatters families, how I'd never be able to forgive that. There was nothing left to fight for once you made that choice. She started to cry quietly, but after a moment, she pulled herself together enough to ask, how did you even find out I was cheating? We were so careful. I let out a bitter laugh. Pure accident, I said, then explained the events of that morning. Her eyes went wide as she listened, disbelief on her face. When I finished, she sank into a chair on the porch. This story is so insane it barely sounds real, she muttered, shaking her head. Google Earth, I replied with a grim smile, like seeing it all from above. It might have been funny if it hadn't been happening to me. Samantha looked at me with a rare sincerity. Dawn, I'm really sorry, she said softly. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope someday you'll let go of the anger. I don't know if I'll ever get there, I replied, turning to leave, but thanks for saying that. That was the last time we spoke face to face for quite a while. A year went by, and my personal life remained mostly the same. I went on a few dates, but I wasn't searching for anything serious. My focus stayed on my kids. Watching them grow up was a real joy. Ethan, now 10, had taken an interest in the family business and loved helping with the plants, especially when it came to Japanese rock gardens. Natalie, at 12, seemed to lean toward a career in healthcare, but she still had plenty of time to decide. It was my concern for Natalie that led me to volunteer as a chaperone for the school sock hop that fall. Hannah and her new husband might talk me into it. If you've got kids around that age, you know it could be like pulling teeth to get parents to volunteer for these things. So there I was watching kids bounce around the gym, feeling completely out of touch with the music when Hannah came up beside me. Hi, she said, startling me a little. Huh? What? I replied, caught off guard. Why don't you go talk to her? Hannah said, nodding toward a woman across the gym. Hannah, what are you talking about? I asked, feeling clueless. That teacher over there, she pointed. The cute brunette in the cream and charcoal sweater. She's been glancing your way all night. Go talk to her before the night's over. I looked around and finally spotted the woman she meant. Are you sure she's looking at me? I asked, skeptical. Trust me, Don. Women notice these things. Go for it. I shrugged. Why not? She was attractive, and nothing else had really worked out lately. After a brief hesitation, I made my way over to introduce myself. As I got closer, I noticed she seemed to be around my age. When she turned and our eyes met, I couldn't help but notice her bright green eyes. Hi, I said once I reached her. I'm Don Langston, Natalie and Ethan's dad. She smiled warmly and held out her hand. Hi, Don. I'm Linda Harris, Greg's mom. I teach 6th grade here. Nice to meet you, Linda, I replied, smiling back. Likewise, she said, still smiling. We don't get too many single dads volunteering as chaperones. Yeah, I guess, I shrugged. But my kids are worth it, and it's not like I had other plans tonight. She raised an eyebrow, giving me an amused look. How'd you know I was single? I asked, genuinely curious. Well, your ring finger's empty, she replied with a grin. And the woman you were talking to is here with her husband. I'm pretty observant, and you seemed like you were flying solo. You're pretty sharp, I said, impressed. And yes, I am single. She laughed, and that's when I realized I was still holding her hand. Oh, sorry. I muttered, letting go a bit awkwardly. Don't worry, she said, chuckling. If it bothered me, I'd have let you know. Her smile lit up her whole face, and I felt completely drawn in. Maybe it was the striking green of her eyes, or maybe just something about her, but I didn't want to look away. We spent the next few minutes talking about our kids, sharing a few laughs, and honestly, I couldn't remember the last time I felt so relaxed. I mentioned to Dawn that Natalie was already thinking about a career in nursing and how Ethan enjoyed helping me with work. Dawn shared a few stories about Greg's love for electronics and the minor chaos that came along with it. Before I realized it, Hannah nudged me with a grin. Time to pack up the kids, Dawn, she said, amused by my surprise. The DJ's already breaking down his equipment. We started rounding up the kids, making sure each one found the right parent. Once everything was in order, we tidied up and left the gym. As we walked toward the parking lot, Dawn surprised me by slipping her hand into mine. "Give me a call sometime," she said, tucking a small folded note into my shirt pocket. "I'd love to go out to dinner with you." Then, with a smile, she and Greg headed to their car and were gone. That night felt like a turning point for me, and I didn't wait long to call her. Dawn was utterly charming, and I found myself thinking about her constantly. Our first dinner date ended with a few sweet kisses, but we didn't rush things. Dawn seemed to like me as much as I liked her, but she was cautious, and I was fine with taking things at her pace. There was so much to admire about her. She was intelligent, practical, and resourceful. Like me, she didn't have a lot of extra money, so she'd come up with clever ways to save. She showed me a few of her budget hacks, and they helped us free up funds for other things. As I got to know her better, I discovered she had a love for gardening, although she joked that she had a black thumb. I knew a few tips for reviving plants, so I was glad to help out. I even pitched in with some budget-friendly projects around her place, transforming her backyard and patio into a cozy outdoor space. Eventually, I opened up about my past, telling her about Samantha and later about Katie. She was clearly shocked, but wasn't overly bothered by the fact that I'd posted the video online. "Actions have consequences," she said matter-of-factly. Honestly, she got off easy. Dawn got along well with my kids, and her son Greg was a good kid too. Thankfully, all the kids seemed to get along well, which was a relief. Over time, our relationship grew, deepening emotionally and physically. After 8 months, I started thinking about marriage again. The memory of the disaster with Katie still lingered, but I didn't want the past to ruin my future. I talked it over with the kids. Natalie was thrilled, but Ethan seemed a little less enthusiastic. I had a feeling he was still hoping I'd get back together with Samantha, but he agreed it was okay. I went ahead and bought another engagement ring since I'd sold the one I bought for Katie. All that was left was to plan the proposal. After thinking it over and getting some advice from my mom, I decided to pop the question on my 40th birthday, just 2 weeks away. It wouldn't be a big event, just a small gathering with close friends, my parents, Dawn, and Greg. I thought it'd be the perfect setting. Keeping the proposal a secret for those 2 weeks was tough. I had to make sure the kids didn't spill the beans, send a quiet invite to Dawn's family, and avoid giving anything away myself. Finally, my birthday evening arrived. My parents had rented a private room at Misha's, a local restaurant known for its Russian cuisine. The dinner was fantastic, and we had a great time eating and dancing. When it was time for gifts, I thanked everyone as I unwrapped each present. Dawn looked a little surprised to see her parents and brother at the party, but she kept her cool. After I'd opened the last gift, I stood up and wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I smiled at everyone. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I said, smiling. "This is officially the best 40th birthday I could ask for." I made a small joke, and everyone chuckled, though I heard one of the kids whisper they didn't get it. As the laughter settled, Hannah handed me the ring box with a quiet smile. "There's just one last thing I'd like to do before we call it a night," I said, my heart racing. "I've gotten some wonderful gifts tonight, but there's one more I'm hoping for." Dawn tilted her head, a puzzled look on her face. "Dawn, I love you more than words can say." I began, looking into her eyes. "You've brought so much joy into my life. The only way it could get better is if you'd share the rest of it with me." I got down on one knee and opened the ring box. "Dawn, will you marry me?" The room went silent as everyone realized what was happening. I held Dawn's gaze, waiting for her to say yes. But she didn't. She hesitated. I kept waiting. "Dawn," I said softly, my voice starting to shake, "please say something." She mumbled something under her breath, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "Dawn," I asked, trying to keep calm. "Dawn, this isn't really the right time to talk about this," she stammered, taking a step back. "Maybe we should, I felt my heart drop. I stood up, feeling the weight of the silence, as she quickly went over to Greg, took his hand, and hurried out of the restaurant without even stopping for her coat. A few moments after she left, I looked around to see everyone staring at me, stunned into silence. "Well," I said, forcing a wide, fake smile, "thanks for coming out tonight and making it a great evening. Have a good night, everyone." I gathered my things, slipped the ring box into my coat pocket, and gestured to the kids. "Dawn, sweetheart," my mom said softly, reaching for my hand. "Would you like us to take the kids tonight?" I shrugged, barely caring. "Hey, do you two want to stay with Nana and Pappy tonight?" "Yeah, that'd be great," Ethan said eagerly. Natalie looked up at me with sad eyes. Daddy, I'm so sorry. Thanks, Nat. I replied firmly, cutting her off. But you don't have to say anything. I just want you to know I love you, Daddy, she whispered, hugging me tightly. Love you too, Nat, I said, doing my best to hold it together. After saying goodbye to my parents, I headed home. The drive was short, but it felt endless. Once inside, I locked the door, tossed my things on the couch, and grabbed a beer. I downed it fast, but it did little to numb the sting. I thought about heading to the liquor store, but decided against it. Getting drunk wouldn't help. Instead, I sank into my armchair and put on some old 80s sitcoms on Netflix. After a few hours, I finally got drowsy and fell asleep in the chair. The next morning, I woke up stiff from sleeping awkwardly. Never again, I muttered, stretching as I moved through my morning routine. While getting dressed, I realized I hadn't turned on my phone since the night before. When I did, my voicemail was full, and texts from friends were piling up. Most were just offering support or an ear if I needed it. The voicemails were similar, except for one from Dawn. It was short, just a few seconds. I'm sorry, Dawn. Please believe me. I have my reasons. I hope one day you'll understand and forgive me. Goodbye. I didn't answer any of the messages. I spent the day trying not to think about her. That, in a nutshell, has been the story of my life. You know, in movies, the cheated-on husband ends up with a big house, a beautiful wife, and a perfect life. But that's not how things turn out for me. It's been 10 years since my divorce from Samantha. Natalie's in college now, studying to be a nurse, and Ethan just graduated from high school. He's starting college in the fall, maybe to go into business. Whether he'll join the family business, though, is still up in the air. As for me, I'm 45 now, still single. I occasionally date, but there's no one I'd call special. About a year ago, Katie resurfaced briefly in my life. She made it clear she just wanted a good time, so we partied for a couple of months, then drifted apart, no hard feelings. One night, she asked me, "Why didn't you ever remarry?" I just shrugged. The risk isn't worth it anymore. I'd like a wife, sure, but I don't believe in fairy tales anymore. Dawn's parents eventually told me she moved in with someone about a year after I proposed. They even came to me, hoping I could convince her to come back, which was ironic since my proposal probably scared her off in the first place. I never asked for more details, and she never gave me any. Samantha, on the other hand, got remarried to the guy who owned the diner where she worked. The kids say they're happy, and I hope for his sake he had her sign a prenup. My father passed away a few months ago and left the family business to me. Sadly, I don't think my mother will be around much longer. She's been overcome by grief. Losing my dad shows in every word she says, every move she makes. I always wanted a marriage like my parents had, built on loyalty and love. But maybe that kind of marriage doesn't fit in today's world. I'm just a landscaper, not a philosopher, so I'll leave those questions to someone else. Before Katie left again, she asked me something interesting. Any regrets? Of course I do, I replied. I regret marrying a cheater, wasting my time with women who didn't want the same things I did. But then I realized what she was actually asking. She wanted to know if I regretted making Samantha famous, divorcing her, or being angry at her for years. The honest answer is no. I regret that posting the video became necessary, but I don't regret doing it. And I never will. She got what she deserved, and if I had to go through it all again, I'd do the same thing. As for me, I'll keep working hard, loving my kids, and watching them grow. I'm looking forward to grandkids someday. I haven't completely given up on the idea of finding a wife, but it's not something I'm focused on anymore. I'll find happiness wherever I can. It's not the life I planned, but it's still a good one. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow.